26 years since one of the worst school shootings in American history at Columbine High School in Colorado. 12 students and one teacher died during the shooting and attempted bombing. The shooting forever changed how schools approach safety, but how much progress has really been made since then? Here to discuss is school security expert at the National School Safety and Security Services, Ken Trump. Ken, thank you so much for coming back to 21 News at 5.
Good to be with you again.
Yes, Columbine was one of the most deadly school shootings at one point in our country, but unfortunately the record has been surpassed by a number of other school shootings, including the Uvalde, Sandy Hook, and Parkland school shootings. 26 years later, what do you think schools and law enforcement have learned when it comes to school safety?
Well, we've certainly seen a number of school shootings continue, and in many cases the shooters actually do a lot of research back to Columbine. That seems to be a very iconic event, not only for the school officials who've dealt with this for decades, the aftermath of Columbine and other school shootings, but also for the shooters themselves who tend to worship, to some extent, those shooters. What we've learned is that we're really going back to the beginning, in many cases, focusing on the fundamentals in school safety. We've evolved to a point where people think that let's get AI weapons detection systems and high-tech physical security measures, hardware, technology, and products. And yet, when we examine the high-profile mass shootings, they tend to point back to alleged failures of human factors, people, policies, procedures, training, communications, systems gaps, not failures of hardware, technology, and products. So we're trying to spend our time in schools saying focus on the fundamentals, the basics of school safety.
And just last week, 2 students were killed at Florida State University. The suspect in that shooting, Phoenix Eichner, may have used his mother's gun that was used in the shooting. Do you believe that she will face charges in the shootings?
Well, the facts will have to be examined on that. We don't have all of those, but one of the things that we're already seeing evolve in that conversation is the fact that there's some type of typical grievance, some type of activity, behavior, something that angered this person. And these grievances are built up over a period of time. The questions that need to be looked at is what type of grievance did this shooter have? Well, who was he angry with? What caused that? Were there warning signs? And most of all, if someone saw the warning signs, did they tell somebody ahead of time that could have potentially prevented a tragedy? It goes back on the pathway to violence, looking at the behaviors leading up to someone having a grievance to the point where they took out their grievance in an act of violence against people.
You mentioned school safety training. School districts have had, emergency school training drills. When it comes to safety, they also have add door locks in some cases. Does there need to be anything added or maybe reviewed in your sector where you're, looking at school security and the process? What must a district or a campus have?
Well, I was in more than 40 schools just in the last 2 months out on the West Coast doing security and emergency planning assessments, multiple times that over the past year. And as we're out in the schools, we're seeing the need to train staff not to memorize a 125-page emergency plan like we have in many states, and including voluminous ones here in Ohio. And those are important to have, but when the crisis hits, nobody grabs the plan. It's the training that you do ahead of time, going through hypothetical scenarios, building shared mental models, common understanding, because your school secretary sees something differently than the custodian, than the principal, than the school officer. And you need to have those people come together before an incident occurs and go through those type of hypothetical scenarios. And most of all, again, focus on situational awareness. Be fully present when you're supervising kids. We look for abnormalities and patterns. Educators are great. That car didn't belong in the drop-off line. There's a stranger in the hallway. And then better train school people to make cognitive decisions under stress, because the challenges we're seeing, the incidents we're seeing come into schools today are not ones that are typically scripted in your emergency plan. So you have to be able to think beyond those, not stress people out to try to memorize dozens and dozens of pages, and focus on the fundamentals of active supervision, recognizing abnormalities and patterns, things that are unusual, and how to make good decisions right on the front line. A teacher, custodian, secretary, when something happens, so that you can properly intervene and, most of all, properly identify something before it ever escalates to an act of violence.
All right. I really appreciate you joining us on the heels of yet another school shooting. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Always good to be with you.